Alright, hi guys, how's it going? I first off want to give you a little background information on my topic. If I were to say, do you know that trophy in pro sports that looks like a big bowl and it's over 120 years old? Would you guys know what I was talking about? It's the Stanley Cup. It's the championship trophy for winning the NHL championship. The Stanley Cup was first awarded in 1893, and it was founded by the 1892 Governor General of Canada, Lord Stanley, who originally purchased the cup for what would be the equivalent of about $50 today. If you are familiar with the cup, it looks like a big bowl, and it's got rings descending down. And on each of these rings, it's actually got the name of each player from each championship team. So, I mean, that's kind of cool because your name's etched in history. So another interesting fact about the cup is that each player that wins the cup actually gets a day with it to do whatever they want. Some of the things, they range from drinking alcohol out of it, putting it in a swimming pool, swimming around with it, even eating ice cream out of it, and there have actually been a couple baptisms in the cup. So it's kind of a big deal. One last interesting fact about the cup itself. It was actually flown into Afghanistan in 2007 just to boost morale for the troops that were over there. So my proposition today is that Lord Stanley's Cup is the most difficult trophy to win in North American sports. My individual claims are that the NHL regular season is the most rigorous season of any sport. The playoffs are designed to test the limits of each of these individual players. And more on that is that I feel that you need to have the complete team to win the cup. So, my first claim, the NHL regular season is the most rigorous season of any sport. So you play 82 60-minute regular season games, which, I mean, you occasionally get a back-to-back game. So you're flying in and you're going out, and it gets pretty hectic. According to hockeygraphs.com, the average NHL player is 6'1" and weighs about 200 pounds. So these are big dudes, and they're all fully equipped. The sport is very physically demanding. I'm sure most of you know that in hockey you can fight, you can hit, you can skate around and take people out that you don't like. So you got to consider how much endurance is required of these players. There was a study that shows that the average NHL player skates at about 20 to 25 miles per hour for a pretty prolonged period of time. So you have to consider with that, you have to actually avoid being hit, which is pretty important unless you want to get taken out of a game. And you have to occasionally, if you're lucky, take a shot at a net or avoid being hit by a puck, which is a pretty solid rubber puck that on average goes about 80 to 90 miles an hour. And that information was provided by an Exploratorium website, which registered the speed of the wrist shot, which is the most common shot in the NHL. The hardest shot is the slap shot, which the record for that, as given by the NHL's website, is 108.8 miles per hour. So imagine getting hit by that. Wouldn't feel too good. On average, there's about 29 shots per game, and there's 18 active skaters per roster each game. So that equates to about 1.61 shot per player per game. So you got to figure that, you got 12 guys out on the ice. There's not much room when these 200-pound huge guys are coming at you and they're going to take you out if you try to take a shot on their goalie. So that brings me to my second point, that the NHL playoffs are designed to push these 16 teams to their absolute limit. Basically, hockey is a streaky sport. I know that some sports are like that, but you got to figure that your first seeded team with the best record all year has the chance to be eliminated immediately. And that is because you've got teams that are fighting for a playoff spot and don't really catch fire until the last couple weeks of the season. And they'll take you out if they need to, if they know that they're in it to win it. So it consists of 4 rounds of a best-of-7 series, and believe it or not, these are even more physically demanding than the regular season games. HockeyReference.com states that in 2014 and 15 playoffs, there was a defenseman for the Chicago Blackhawks by the name of Duncan Keith who skated for an average of 31 minutes per game. So imagine all the facts that I previously mentioned and still playing for pretty much essentially half a game. So, oh, and in comparison, you've got, say, like the NFL playoffs, which, I mean, it's a lot less taxing on these players when you're playing once a week and you're only playing a couple games compared to playing potentially maybe 3 or 4 games a week, and you go 2-2-1-1-1 for being at home and going away. So you're traveling, there's travel time, and it does weigh on the players. My third point is that the NHL teams are the least likely to benefit from one star player, and it focuses on having the complete team to win the championship. Current players in the NHL grew up watching these championship teams and really aspired to be like these players that they grew up watching. And it kind of gave you that sense that you want to grow up and you want to win this championship, have your name on the cup, and you want to win it with the team that you're playing 82 games throughout a regular season with. I mean, it really shows the heart and soul of these guys. So like I said, you do have to have the complete package, and you have to worry about maintaining that, but the salary cap in the NHL is far more restrictive than it is in other sports. And you have to, usually once you win a championship, your players are going to ask for a little bit more money just because they do deserve it. So that leads to not just one team really being a favorite every year, because you can't just buy these star players. You have to get by with what you have, and you have to really grow them through your organization. So, in conclusion, I just want to go over that the NHL regular season is the most rigorous of any sport. The playoffs are designed to really push you to your limit, and that it really focuses on a team game as opposed to just having one guy out there. So I do feel that Lord Stanley's Cup is the most difficult trophy to win in North American sports. Thank you.
All right, Ryan, I like the opening section with all of the history about the cup and some stories about how people celebrate using the cup and that sort of thing. I think that's interesting. It needs to be a little bit briefer because it takes you almost 2 minutes to get to your proposition. So we got a whole set of information that comes before we get to your argument. And I understand the context is kind of important to set up. Here's why it's interesting. Here's why it's important. Here's why we're going to be making this argument. But maybe a little bit of editing there, a little bit sharper on that particular point. When you get to the proposition, it's clearly stated, so I know what your argument is, and I thought that you had a very clear layout of what the structure was going to be. Here's how you're going to develop it. Your supporting points are identified. You've got a numerical signpost on them, and in the body of the speech, I think you do a very good job signposting those for the most part, reminding us of what each point is. Now, I do think that there are some assumptions that are in your argument that need to be developed a little bit more and need a little bit more argument. So, for example, I like the information that you started off with on it being rigorous, where you're talking about the number of games that they play, how big the players are, the physical demands, how much skating they're doing, that kind of thing. Just as a thought, because you're talking about how rigorous it is, I'm thinking about, well, how frequent are injuries? How often do people miss games? How many minutes do they play? You mentioned at one point that there was one guy who was in the playoffs and he averaged 31 minutes a game, and I'm going, that doesn't sound like that much, but I don't know anything, and so I think you need. If you say the average player skates 15 minutes in a game, something like that. then I know that 31 minutes is double that. That's pretty impressive. Or that they, that they play this game. I assume it's an hour.
Yes.
That kind of thing. It just feels like 3. Sorry, that was an editorial comment. Hockey, it's like soccer indoors.
No, it's not. That makes me so angry. No.
It's equally boring, and just an editorial comment. No, I'm sure soccer and hockey, they're both great sports. But you've got this information. You're doing. Let's get the comparison. I did hear a comparison that you had later on, where you talked about the amount of travel that they have to do. For example, in the playoff system, I thought that was pretty good. If you were talking about football, that's an easy one to dismiss because you say they get 4 games that they play and they get a week between each of those games. So that comparison is pretty solid. Other games, though, people are sitting there, well, basketball teams play 7-game playoff series, and they do the travel, sometimes they do they go back and forth, 2, 3, and 2, or
I actually did have an example that I just didn't mention because I knew I was running out of time.
Yeah.
But
so you need some more of that kind of stuff.
Okay, because there was a player that in the playoffs he suffered a broken rib, torn cartilage, and a separated shoulder, and came back and played the next game.
Yeah, and that I think
Bergeron.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that you need to have in the speech.
Yes.
So, because I know that it's a rigorous game, even though it's not my favorite, that doesn't mean that it isn't.
Right.
You can tell these guys work there. That's a hard thing to do. But you got to explain it a little bit more to people.
No,
that,
I agree.
and they're playing night after night after night. And people go, well, baseball plays 162 games in the regular season. Why is 82 games in the hockey season so different? Basketball, they play 82 games and they're out there night after night busting their tail ends. Why is it different? And you got to tell us why it's rigorous, that stuff. And then what's different about the playoffs? Well, the playoffs are different. The most comparable one, I assume, would be to basketball.
It's a similar
because you have the
structure.
same number of teams that make the playoffs, and you've got the similar kind of structure. So you're saying it's really designed. When you talked about the streaky thing at the end of the season, and that's how people get into the playoffs, I think there's a very good point there. My first question that's popping in my head, and this ought to be data that you could find, how frequently does a lower seed beat a higher seed team in the playoffs in the NHL versus other competitions? In basketball, the likelihood that the number 1 seed in their conference is going to be beaten by the number 8 seed in their conference doesn't seem like it's really high, but in hockey it happens all the time. For instance, if you could say, 1/3 of the time the bottom seeds beat the top seeds in the first round of the playoffs, that would, and versus that happens 10% of the time in other things. That's the kind of stuff that you ought to have. Well, don't show me there. I'm telling you, this is the speech that I heard. I didn't hear it in the speech.
Yeah.
That's what you need to have on that particular argument. All right, we've talked about hockey way too much here. All right, I'm going to stop here.
Keep going.